On the morning my neighbor's bulldozer roared to life across the street, I realized something important. I'd made a huge mistake thinking I could quietly retire to these peaceful suburban lanes. That rumbling machine belonged to none other than Harriet Reese, newly elected head of the Maplewood Springs Homeowners Association. By the time I stumbled out my front door in a half-tied robe, I saw that Harriet had an entire crew assembled at the edge of my yard, as if preparing for battle. Their main target was my beloved solar array, the row of shining panels I'd spent the better part of a year installing. I'm Henry Bingham, a retired electrical engineer who has spent the last 20 years exploring alternative energy. I moved to Maplewood Springs for the wide streets, the old oak trees, and the friendly neighbors who'd wave at you from their porches. After a corporate career, all I wanted was to tinker with personal projects in peace, especially my precious solar setup. Maplewood Springs, though, wasn't exactly the whimsical retirement paradise I'd envisioned. Not once Harriet stepped up as HOA president. She was a short woman in crisp suits and red heels, always armed with a color-coordinated clipboard. She had a voice like a clarinet in dire need of tuning, and a habit of walking on people's lawns without any shame. I'd done my best to stay on her good side, mailed in my HOA dues on time, painted my mailbox the required shade of forest green, and kept my grass trimmed to regulation height. But none of that mattered. Harriet had heard about my solar array through the neighborhood grapevine and decided that it didn't fit the Maplewood Springs aesthetic. That morning, as the bulldozer snorted and wheezed at the end of my driveway, Harriet strutted over. She tapped her foot on the curb. "Mr. Bingham," she shouted, "you've got about 10 minutes to remove those hideous contraptions. If not, we're dismantling them right now." My jaw just about hit the pavement. "Harriet, I've got permits for all of this," I said. My voice was steady, at least for the moment. She gave me a sweet, artificial smile. "Permits? From the county, maybe, but Maplewood Springs has a specific set of standards for external structures. You neglected to get them approved by the Architectural Committee, of which I am the new chair. These panels are a nuisance. They reflect sunlight into the neighbor's windows, kill the curb appeal, and they just don't match your roofline." I nearly laughed. "You can't be serious. This setup took me months of planning, not to mention thousands of dollars. I can't just—" She cut me off with the wave of her hand. "Enough. The law is the law. Consider this your final notice." Neighbors started gathering around like it was a neighborhood block party, only one I was forced to host against my will. A few looked concerned, some even outraged, but not one dared to challenge Harriet's authority. She was unstoppable in that moment, a short, enraged bulldozer in heels. I forced myself to remain calm, but on the inside, my heart hammered. I'd always try to stay above the petty politics, but Harriet was playing a different game altogether. She wanted to assert her authority in a grand public spectacle, maybe set an example that nobody was bigger than the HOA. I offered Harriet one more chance to be reasonable. "Ma'am, how about we give each other a couple days to sort through the paperwork? I can show you the county's regulations, and we can figure out a compromise. The panels are fully up to code. No hazard, no reflective glare issues. In fact, the neighbors on both sides have told me they don't mind. Let's talk it out." Her face didn't budge an inch. "We aren't the county, Mr. Bingham. Maplewood Springs is a private community. We have our own rules. If you want to court date over it, be my guest. But in the meantime, we're removing the eyesore. Right now." She motioned to the bulldozer operator, a tall, scruffy man with a worried expression. He hesitated, though, clearly not thrilled about demolishing private property. "Hey, Harriet," he said, "are we absolutely sure we should do this? Guy says he's got a county permit." Harriet gave him a glare so scorching you'd think we didn't need solar panels at all. We had Harriet's wrath to power the entire neighborhood. "Do you want her paycheck or not?" she barked. That was enough to snap him in line. He revved the engine. I felt a surge of panic. 2 minutes ago, I'd been sipping coffee in my pajamas, and now I was on the brink of losing the entire system I'd worked on for months. "Stop!" I shouted as loud as I could. But Harriet was already signaling him to go. In a flash, the bulldozer jerked forward, wheels crushing my manicured grass. Neighbors gasped. I heard a dreadful crunching noise as the massive machine chewed into the steel frame of the array. Solar panels cracked, glass shattered, and the sound was like nails on a chalkboard to me. Harriet stood there with a smug sense of triumph. My heart pounded as I watched thousands of dollars and countless hours disintegrate under the unstoppable metal beast. I felt powerless, standing in my slippers on my own lawn. It was a violation that went beyond property damage. Harriet was destroying my life's passion, right before my eyes. Before I could fully register the shock, it was done. My solar array was a pile of twisted metal and shattered panels. Harriet nodded once to the work crew, then turned back to me with a smirk. "I'm sorry it had to come to this," she said, though she clearly wasn't. Then she walked away, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my dreams. I had no idea just how big a surprise the future had in store for her, and for me. I spent the rest of that day in a fog. Once the bulldozer was gone and the crowd dispersed, I was left with the wreckage. Glass shards glimmered in the midday sun, and twisted aluminum frames littered the spot where my rows of pristine solar panels had once stood. Even my prized battery storage unit, an old shipping container I'd repurposed and hidden behind the panels, was bashed in. It looked like a giant kicked it. I was still in my robe, staring helplessly, when my closest neighbor, Jake Sullivan, approached. Jake was an old friend, a widower like me. We shared a fondness for crossword puzzles and tinkering in our garages. He wore an expression of sympathetic horror. "Henry, I'm so sorry," he said. "I didn't think Harriet would go through with it. We've had trouble with the HOA before, but never anything like this." I exhaled, trying to steady myself. She has a real streak in her, that's for sure. I knelt down and carefully picked up a piece of shattered glass from the grass. And it's not just the panels. She destroyed my backup battery system, too. I tossed the glass shard into a nearby trash can. This was going to power my house, and possibly some of yours if you ever needed it. This was my big project. Jake sighed. "You should lawyer up, Henry. There's no way she can get away with this." He was right. As soon as I got my head on straight, I contacted an attorney. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, document searches, and sleepless nights. My attorney, a whip-smart woman named Felicia Oliver, pored over every Maplewood Springs covenant and county permit regulation. For what she told me, I had a solid case. The HOA might have rules, but their enforcement method, bulldozing someone's property, was heavy-handed, to say the least. She advised me to file a lawsuit, but she also warned me that HOAs had tricky ways of dragging people into protracted legal battles. And Harriet was notorious for rallying the board members behind her. She had a knack for twisting bylaws to her advantage. Still, I wasn't about to give up. All the while, Harriet carried on as if she'd done nothing wrong. She had her usual morning walks through the neighborhood, handing out violation slips for things like faded shutters or garden gnomes in poor taste. One afternoon, I caught her scribbling a note to someone with a rose bush that apparently encroached on the sidewalk by half an inch. It was maddening. I tried to find ways to keep my spirits up. I reminded myself I was good at building things, and anything Harriet destroyed, I could eventually rebuild. But a creeping sense of resentment took hold, especially when I overheard Harriet bragging to a board member about how she'd put me in my place. She apparently thought I was some renegade who wanted to turn Maplewood Springs into a solar farm. The breakthrough came one morning when I got a call from Jake. "Henry," he said, voice charged with excitement, "my power's out, but only partially. The lights in my living room flicker on and off, but the rest of the house is dead. I've never seen anything like it." I sighed, suspecting Harriet was somehow behind a new wave of sabotage. "Want me to come over and take a look?" He hesitated. "Actually, the electrician can't get here for a few hours. Maybe you'll spot something obvious." Within minutes, I was standing at Jake's fuse box, flashlight in hand. The circuits were fine, nothing tripped. I peered into the wiring and recognized something strange. Some of it looked oddly new, as if spliced in from another feed. This wasn't part of Jake's original home infrastructure. Scratching my head, I traced the wires out to the meter on the side of the house. That's when I noticed a conduit that ran underground toward Harriet's property. Jake and Harriet shared a back fence, but I hadn't known about any shared lines. Unless, "Jake," I said slowly, "I think Harriet might have had some electricians tie into your system. or at least run some line that crosses your property. Was there any kind of construction in your yard recently? He shrugged. Harriet replaced some of the neighborhood power lines a while ago. Claimed it was part of an HOA upgrade. We all had to pitch in, but I never questioned it. You don't think she rigged something, do you? I didn't want to make any accusations yet, but I'd seen enough suspicious things in corporate infrastructure projects to guess Harriet might be trying to do something on the sly. Maybe funnel power from certain homes into a private battery bank, or feed parts of the neighborhood from a single, unapproved feed. My own expertise as an engineer kicked into high gear. I checked a few more connections on Jake's property. Sure enough, the lines that Harriet had installed all ran back to a single control panel near her home. I felt my heart race. This might be huge. Jake, I need to do some research, but I think Harriet's messing with the neighborhood's power distribution. She might even be siphoning electricity from you, and maybe from others. A part of me lit up with excitement. If Harriet was operating an unapproved private grid, maybe I could figure out a way to prove she was violating the rules she used to control everyone else. It was poetic justice. And, ironically, if I'd been allowed to keep my own solar array, I might have never noticed this fiasco. That same day, I pulled up the county records, rummaging for any mention of Harriet applying for a private power system. There was nothing. Not one word about an approved microgrid or distribution lines. Meanwhile, the Maplewood Springs covenants strictly forbade any personal modifications to community utilities without a board majority vote, so Harriet needed the entire board on her side. And she still would have needed to follow county procedures. If she hadn't, she'd violated code in a serious way. I started to suspect Harriet's anti-solar campaign was more than just an aesthetic preference or a personal vendetta. She might have destroyed my array because she was afraid I'd uncover her little secret. It would make sense. As an electrical engineer, I was perhaps the only resident with the expertise to expose any funny business with local power lines. I felt a surge of determination. If Harriet was playing dirty, I could play the game too, legitimately, of course. By following the paperwork trail, by carefully documenting everything, I could challenge her in a much bigger arena than just a petty HOA hearing. But I also had to consider the bigger question. Why was she siphoning electricity if indeed that was what she was doing? Could it be that her home had some unusual energy needs? Or was she charging neighbors for power she was actually stealing from the grid? The more I thought about it, the more complicated it seemed. One thing was certain. Harriet's crusade to flatten my solar panels might have backfired spectacularly. Her biggest mistake was thinking she could demolish my project and that I wouldn't fight back or notice her hidden agenda. Now, I planned to uncover everything, and I had a feeling Harriet wouldn't see it coming. I spent the next few weeks living a double life. By day, I was the mild-mannered retiree chatting with neighbors, mowing my lawn, and keeping as low a profile as possible so Harriet wouldn't suspect anything. By night, I combed through public records, my own property's electrical diagrams, and any building permits the HOA had filed. It turned out Harriet's HOA improvements over the past 6 months were mostly superficial, painting fences, upgrading a few street lamps, and installing a row of security cameras at the neighborhood entrance. None of it explained the underground wiring I'd seen near Jake's house. Then I got a stroke of luck. One of Harriet's contractors, a man named Antonio, reached out to me. I'd met him briefly during one of her beautification projects, and he'd seemed decent enough. He told me he'd heard about what Harriet did to my solar array, and he was uneasy about some of the work she'd asked him to do. Over a nervous phone call, he confessed that Harriet had privately hired him to reroute certain power lines, ones connected to the community grid. She claimed she had special permission, and he never pressed her for more details because the money was good. But now, hearing about how she bulldozed my yard, Antonio suspected there might be foul play. That's not even the strangest part, Antonio said. She also had me install a separate breaker box in her basement, one that bypasses the main panel. It's hooked up to a row of battery inverters, all brand new. She said it was for a personal solar project, but I never saw any panels on her roof. My mind raced. Harriet had a hidden battery system. I knew enough about small-scale power grids to guess that Harriet was feeding something into those batteries, possibly from other people's lines, then powering her house, and who knows what else, off that stolen feed. It was both illegal and unbelievably hypocritical. Here she was punishing me for having a properly permitted solar array, while she quietly built her own unapproved power station. I needed more evidence. So, late one evening, I snuck into the easement near Harriet's property with a shovel and a voltage meter. Technically, the area was common ground belonging to the HOA, so I wasn't trespassing on her private property. Under cover of darkness, I carefully unearthed a small section of cable. It was exactly as Antonio described, a thick line leading from the neighborhood's main feed to Harriet's house. The meter showed a flow of current that was definitely not just your average household draw. It was surreal. Harriet was basically running her own microgrid, likely saving herself a fortune while distributing the rest of the cost to the rest of the neighborhood. And if I had to guess, she was also using it to power some personal project, maybe a high-capacity system or a set of batteries bigger than the standard residential supply. It was next-level corruption, tucked away behind meticulously trimmed hedges and those ridiculous daisies she arranged along her walkway. I photographed everything, documenting the gauge of the wires, the color coding, and the routing. Then I replaced the dirt as best I could. If Harriet caught me, I'd have a lot of explaining to do. But it felt good, in a cloak and dagger sort of way, to finally have the upper hand. The next day, I reached out to Felicia, my lawyer. I had a strong feeling that Harriet's entire operation was illegal enough to warrant immediate attention from local authorities. Felicia was beside herself with disbelief. "This is more than an HOA dispute," she said. "Harriet's potentially committing utility fraud, tampering with municipal lines, and misappropriating HOA funds if she's using them to install all this." We decided to collect more evidence. Felicia wanted ironclad proof before filing a major complaint. So I asked Antonio if he could give me any receipts or documentation, anything tying Harriet's private projects to HOA budgets. He said he'd look into it. Meanwhile, I considered paying Harriet a visit myself. But after what she did to my solar panels, I knew better than to confront her on her turf without backup. Then came the moment that sealed Harriet's fate. Around mid-afternoon on a Wednesday, a small power outage rolled across Maplewood Springs. The entire south side of the neighborhood lost electricity for about 2 hours. The phone lines lit up with complaints to the utility company, but Harriet's house was suspiciously unaffected. Neighbors noticed Harriet's lights stayed on, her fridge was humming, and her security cameras continued to blink. How could that be, unless she was drawing from a private source? It wasn't long before word spread through the neighborhood that Harriet might be tapping into something else. People started suspecting she'd singled out my solar panels because they threatened her secret arrangement. A few neighbors finally approached me, apologizing for not standing up for me when she bulldozed my system. "I guess we never thought Harriet would stoop that low," one neighbor admitted. "We just wanted to keep the peace. But now it looks like she's using us. We'd all love to have a functional solar array like you. Instead, she destroyed yours and replaced it with her own hush-hush power rig." That night, Jake and I met in my living room, huddled over a pile of documents. A flicker of righteous anger danced in Jake's eyes. "I want to testify, Henry," he said. "I want to tell anyone who'll listen how Harriet threatened me with violations if I let you fix some wiring in my home. She's out of control, and people need to know." He was right. The time for caution was over. I had more than enough evidence, photographs, recordings, testimonies. Harriet's entire scheme was on the verge of collapse. My only real worry was that she'd do something drastic before I could bring it all out into the open. After all, if Harriet bulldozed my solar panels without batting an eyelash, who knew what else she was capable of? Still, I felt a rising sense of satisfaction in imagining Harriet's reaction when she discovered I had the power, figuratively and in a twist of fate, literally, to take her down. She thought she was unstoppable, but I had every intention of proving her wrong. In just a few short days, I planned to trigger a chain of events that would put Harriet in the hot seat she rightfully deserved, while clearing the path for me to rebuild my beloved solar array, without harassment this time. Because if Harriet's light stayed on during that blackout, it meant she was running off the community lines, stolen electricity, or some twisted combination of the two. And soon enough, everyone at Maplewood Springs and beyond would discover the truth. On the morning we exposed Harriet's grand scheme, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. There's a certain tension when you know you're about to flip the tables on someone who's been bullying you and your neighbors. By mid-afternoon, a handful of local government officials and a county inspector arrived in Maplewood Springs, courtesy of Felicia's carefully orchestrated calls. While Harriet was busy pestering one of our neighbors about their missing recycle bin, the officials and inspector quietly performed a thorough walkthrough of the neighborhood's electrical infrastructure. I stayed back, letting the professionals do their job. The last thing I wanted was to tip Harriet off. I had no doubt she'd try to intercept them with whatever charm or intimidation tactics she had at her arsenal. But I did make one minor detour. I swung by Harriet's front yard and managed a quick conversation with her new landscaper, who was understandably jittery. Harriet was inside, apparently on some phone call, giving me just enough time to flash my official inspection papers. The landscaper let me see the side of the house, where behind a line of carefully placed hedges sat a series of unmarked breaker boxes. Each was connected to the lines I discovered. This sealed the deal. I thanked him, then hurried away before Harriet could spot me. An hour later, we held the final showdown at the Maplewood Springs clubhouse. The county inspector, a graying man in a high-visibility vest, convened Harriet, me, Jake, several other board members, and a few neighbors who'd provided statements. Felicia stood by my side, her briefcase stuffed with evidence. Harriet looked confident at first. She clutched her clipboard and tried to command the room. But as soon as the inspector started laying out what he'd found, her veneer cracked. "Mrs. Reese," he began, voice resonating in the small clubhouse. "It appears you've modified the neighborhood's main power lines without proper permits. Moreover, you've installed a private battery system on your property that's being fed by lines from multiple addresses, including Mr. Sullivan's." Harriet's eyes darted around. "That's preposterous," she snapped. "This is a smear campaign by that troublemaker, Mr. Bingham." She pointed a stiff finger in my direction, her voice trembling with anger. "He's always had it out for me, ever since the day I had to enforce the HOA guidelines on his solar monstrosity." The inspector ignored her outburst. "We've confirmed that the lines in question run directly into your basement, where we found a series of battery inverters capable of storing large amounts of electricity. There was no county approval, no public notice, and no documentation that this was for an HOA-sanctioned project." Felicia jumped in. "We also have testimony from one of the contractors you hired, stating you paid him under the table to bypass the main meter." The tension in the room was palpable. A couple of the board members squirmed in their chairs, probably recalling times Harriet forced them to sign off on improvements they never saw in action. One of them cleared her throat, eyeing Harriet warily. "Harriet, is this true? Do we authorize this?" Harriet tried to muster an outraged expression. "Of course we authorized it. You all voted on the budget expansions for improved infrastructure." A bespectacled board member shook his head. "We allocated funds for new security lights and a fence repair, not for some private battery bank." By this point, Harriet's indignation was wilting under the weight of the evidence. Her face flushed, her posture sagged. She tried to sputter some excuse about saving money for the HOA, but the inspector shut her down with a raised hand. "Regardless of your intentions, Mrs. Reese, this is unauthorized tampering with the utility grid. It's a serious offense. My office will be issuing a formal violation, and will be recommending further investigation to the county attorney. It's possible you'll face criminal charges for utility fraud." The words "criminal charges" seemed to drain the last bit of color from Harriet's face. She looked so rattled that, for a fleeting moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That's when Jake spoke up, addressing the gathered neighbors. "You all watched Harriet bulldoze Henry's solar panels, claiming it was for the HOA's benefit. But look at what she was really up to." He gestured to me. Henry's system was legitimate, fully permitted. Harriet destroyed it, because she knew he'd be the one to uncover her scheme. She was protecting herself, plain and simple. A low murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled neighbors. I noticed a few quiet nods, some downcast looks, likely guilt from those who hadn't lifted a finger to defend me when Harriet's bulldozer was on my lawn. Still, it felt good to see the truth vindicated out loud. Harriet pressed her lips together, as if searching for some last-ditch defense. But the inspector's presence made it impossible to wriggle free. She flung her clipboard onto the table with a hollow thwack, then turned to me. There was a glint of anger in her eyes, but also resignation. "You'll regret this, Henry," she hissed. "You think you've won, but—" She never got to finish. Two of the board members rose to their feet, straightening their collars. One said, "Mrs. Reese, we'll be scheduling an emergency vote to remove you as HOA president effective immediately. We can't have a leader who breaks the rules she's meant to uphold." With that, Harriet let out a breath. She gathered her things and stomped out of the clubhouse, her heels echoing on the tiled floor. I watched her go, an odd mix of relief and sadness swirling in my chest. Part of me remembered the simpler days, when Harriet was just a mildly annoying neighbor with a penchant for bossiness. To see her hoist herself on her own petard was satisfying, but also underscored how quickly power can corrupt people if they're so inclined. In the days that followed, a flood of apologies came my way. Neighbors who felt guilty, board members who worried about their complicity, even Harriet's landscaper, who thanked me for uncovering the scheme before he got dragged deeper into her unscrupulous plans. The entire neighborhood reeled from the scandal, and Harriet made herself scarce. There was talk she might move away to avoid the shame. Last I heard, she was staying with a sister in another county while sorting out her legal troubles. As for me, I rebuilt my solar array with renewed determination. The new HOA board not only approved my design, but even offered to help cover some of the reconstruction costs from the general fund, an olive branch extended in the spirit of community repair. And here's the kicker. A few months after everything settled, the board asked if I consider expanding my solar system to power some of the streetlights in common areas. Thanks to Harriet's meltdown, folks realized the value of having a real, regulated source of renewable energy. Sometimes I stand outside on my lawn at sunset, watching the panels track the waning light. I think about how Harriet tried to demolish my dream just to hide her own crimes. In the end, her thirst for power, quite literally, was her downfall. Now I produce clean electricity for my home, and a decent chunk of Maplewood Springs, too. And in the greatest twist of all, it turned out Harriet's house was still partially connected to the energy system I helped design, legally this time. She might have left in disgrace, but whoever ends up living there next will benefit from the power generated by my rebuilt array. I can't help but appreciate the irony. Harriet destroyed my solar array, only to discover I was the one who'd wind up powering her home and the entire neighborhood in a way she never could. That might not be the end she imagined for herself, but for me, it's more than enough justice. And if Harriet ever finds the gumption to set foot back in Maplewood Springs, she'll have to face the fact that you can't bully the sun. It shines for everyone, no matter what petty rules or private power grab someone tries to pull. The end.